Hi everyone, it's John. So I came home last night. I was going to sit down and dutifully record my Tuesday book review, and then turned on this little potato of a webcam that I have, and saw that the lighting was so horrible that it probably wasn't going to be that appreciated. Like in some of my other videos when I used to do book reviews several years ago. I haven't taken any of them down, so you can still go look at them. But I thought I'll just wait till tomorrow when the lighting looks better, and hopefully that will be more appreciated by my viewers. So it's a day late, but you're still getting the same content. So the book today is Scoop. There you go, Scoop by Evelyn Waugh, the great English novelist of the early 20th century. And I just happened to read one of these new sort of faux new. I think it's meant to look like the Penguin Classics back in the 60s and 70s, but these sort of garish orange looking versions. So Scoop was published in 1938, and exactly 80 years after its publication, which would be this year, Scoop is still considered to be the preeminent novel of London's Fleet Street set. Fleet Street being the area of London where a lot of journalism and newspaper writing and reporting is done through. Today, children are much more likely to ask their parents what the purpose of newspapers even was in the first place, since they seem to be dying very quickly, at which point most parents would sort of obligatorily sit them down in front of a warm hearth and regale them with stories about ye olden times when people called journalists were sent out into the world and asked to talk to other people and gathered information and sat in front of a typewriter, which you'll also be asked about because no one knows what those are anymore either, and then asked to type up this information dutifully. And this is how some people actually made their living 80 years ago. And this novel is basically about that. It is about a newspaper man. In fact, before Waugh started writing novels on a regular basis in the late 20s and early 30s, he eked out a living as a journalist in Ethiopia, which was then called Abyssinia, right on the eve of Mussolini's 1935 to 1936 invasion of that country. So what begins with a mistaken case of identity only further devolves in Scoop into sort of this pitiless takedown of journalistic methodology, priorities, and patronage when the helplessly clueless main character is sent off to the remote African country of Ishmaelia, a fictional country, obviously, to report on the, quote, very promising little war that is developing there. And that phrase will sort of give you a hint of what Fleet Street journalism, at least according to Waugh, is all about. The magnate of Fleet Street is a man by the name of Lord Copper, who is a grotesque, sort of straight out of Dickens. He's this homunculus who personifies everything wrong with journalism of the time, from its intellectual ineptitude to its cynical assumptions about public reading tastes. Copper has the intention of sending John Courtney Booth, who is a novelist of some renown, to Africa to report on the war in Ishmaelia. But his cousin of slightly diminished circumstances, named William, gets sent instead. William is a writer too, but of a much less distinguished sort. He's actually a nature columnist who writes the most hilarious, wonderful, overblown purple prose you can imagine. It's not hard to imagine Evelyn Waugh laughing through his fourth Negroni of the afternoon as he's coming up with something as pretentious as one of William's lines that repeats itself throughout the novel, which is, feather-footed through the plashy fin passes the questing vole. And one of his nature columns that he writes weekly or monthly, that's one of the little tidbits that he wrote up for it. So Boot arrives in Ishmailia, and upon failing to find any signs of the civil war that was supposed to be raging there, he encounters a cadre of fellow travelers in journalism who aren't the least bit worried about this lack of instability or the fact that nothing seems to be going on worthy of reporting, despite the fact that they've all been sent there to report on something very, very important and big and politically significant. They're more than happy to just sit back and cobble something together to satisfy their paymasters back home. And William is he's sitting there trying to be intellectually honest, recognizing that nothing of importance is happening, but all these other people are just there to get to steal from the title of the book, the scoop. That's all they want. That's all they care about. So Boot, he just tries to remain, like I said, intellectually honest, writes pieces for the paper. But by the way, the paper is called The Daily Beast, and that's where the name of the website, The Daily Beast, comes from, which Tina Brown now runs, I believe. So if anyone was ever wondering where that website name came from, it's from Scoop. So he's writing these pieces to send back to the Daily Beast that are just singularly unimpressive, or certainly not pushing copy back home. No one cares to read them. And one day he receives a letter from the a telegram from the Daily Boot saying, Lord Copper personally requires victories. In other words, as William Randolph Hearst would have said to Frederick Remington while he was on his own journalistic mission to Cuba over the course of the Spanish-American War, you furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war. One day there's a Soviet coup that's overthrown by Ishmaelian counter-revolutionaries. And William gets his scoop, and he gains the fame that he accidentally tripped over, and he gets to go home. Back to London. The novel ends as William is magnanimously allowed to return back home to cultivate his garden, and one imagines to continue to write for Lush Places, which was the name of his garden column. And another line that Waugh keeps pushing, maternal rodents piloting their furry brood through the stubble. Again, just picture him sitting there writing that out on a typewriter and not being able to really control himself. Wanting to congratulate William for his contributions to journalism, Lord Copper decides that he wants to knight William. But William refuses the honor, thinking, I've had enough of this. This is ridiculous. I'm just going to go back home, do my own thing, and never have to worry about this again. But Lord Copper's lackey, his personal sort of assistant or whatever, tracks William down at his house, called Boot Magna, by the way, Big Boot, to insist that he does actually go, and he tracks, while he's there, he runs into William's uncle Theodore, and the next morning Theodore shows up at Lord Copper's office asking for, a job, thinking that he is, of course, William. So, still another case of mistaken identity, because on Fleet Street, the show must go on. The only other Waugh novel I've ever read was Brideshead Revisited, and for those of you who have had the pleasure of reading Brideshead Revisited, it's still 6 or 8 years on, leaves me with distinctly poignant memories, and is one of the few books on Goodreads that I've actually given a 5-star rating to. The setting and the nostalgia were really nothing less than a full-throated 5 stars for me. And that Waugh could have written such an acerbic commentary in a comic register, and then just 7 years later write a novel every bit as successful, but in an entirely different way, emotional and intellectual sort of approach, a satire essentially, is impressive. And this combined with the fact that in many ways I think Scoop almost asserts itself as a piece of media or cultural criticism, that preternaturally identifies the problem of the sort of narcissistic, empty need for continually breaking news that really is only beginning to present itself in the 1930s, but is still as obvious as ever, really makes me relish the next Waugh novel I might happen to pick up. So, if any of that sounds fun, if you are a fan of Fleet Street in its heyday, or just a good satire, good dry English satire at its best, Evelyn Waugh, Scoop. See you next week. I'll try to make it on Tuesday. Bye.